Hey guys, you're watching Team APS, and as we all know, a lot of decks come and go in Yu-Gi-Oh! We're always, getting ban lists, the meta's always changing, new archetypes, new cards are always coming out, there's power creep. But in this video, I want to share the 5 decks that I've noticed don't seem to really follow that trend. The 5 decks that have stuck around the longest and kind of continue to persist in Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck number 1, Lightsworns. So this deck came out in 2008, right? But the thing about Lightsworns is they've pretty much always been relevant to some degree. Now don't get me wrong, I mean they've had their high points and low points, especially high points, but no matter what, I feel like they always kind of find their way into either another deck or they just can function decently as their own strategy. And the reason why I feel like is because the strategy of massively sending cards from your deck to the graveyard isn't really one that can get crept out very easily. Because, whether it's them kind of being an engine for another deck or them sort of working in tandem, it's always going to be a good thing to send cards from your deck to the graveyard. And any set of monsters that can kind of do that en masse, right? Like effects like Raiden, effects like Raikou, Lila, Lumina, all those things, those are really good. And Lightsworns have also gradually gotten a lot of support. I think of cards like well, the recent trap that searches Judgment Dragon is one thing, but I really think more of cards like Minerva, cards like Felis, that really kind of bring Lightsworns slowly but steadily up to whatever the modern day standard of power is. Minerva can mill a lot, can pop cards. Felis is similar to Wolf, but it actually has kind of a defensive ability and it can mill. And yeah, now the thing about Lightsworns too is that they've also got 2 of the best sort of draw search cards in the entire game. Honestly, I feel like Konami, even with Pantheism, well maybe, hasn't ever quite made spells that are quite this effective. So Charge Light Brigade, mill 3 cards, that's incredible, and then search a Lightsworn. Same with Solar Recharge, pitch a Lightsworn, draw 2, mill 2. It's kind of crazy. Plus they have a really strong boss monster. The funny thing is, Judgment Dragon of all the Lightsworns really and he's not even always the most popular. Sometimes it's just the engine itself. But I think that Lightsworns, no matter how you look at it, has been a deck that's really persisted and probably will continue to do so. Number 2 is Morels. So this deck finds its way on all of my lists videos, but Morels are a really cool one. So they, came out in late 2012, right? And it was just a really powerful strategy. These monsters that basically, discard from the hand to summon each other, then the monsters get discarded, they pop stuff and search stuff, and Morels just had so much searching power, so much spamming power. A lot of their effects were not once per turn. Megalo and all the Atlanteans and, things like that. And so that in tandem with, the Abyss Spheres and everything at the time was really overpowering. The thing is though, Morels have always kind of been able to adapt to the game. Later on when Dragon Rulers came out, they were able to abuse Tidal. And, even after Tidal got banned, and even after Dragoons went to 1, and it kind of looked just sort of, this deck can't do much. Same with Abyss Gun and all that stuff. The deck still was a fairly functioning thing. I mean, it's had a history of even being merged with Fire Fist, which just sounds crazy and weird, but actually does somehow work. And nowadays, it's really pretty good. I mean, it's been a sleeper deck for the entirety of 2016. Or really, at least ever since it got Neptibus, the Atlantean Prince, because that card is crazy. It's summonable by Diva, it's summonable by 1-for-1. It gets your strategies moving, and it actually enables Morels to do some really consistent OTKs. And like I said, the meta relevance of this deck has been up and down, but the fact of the matter is, Morels, even to this day, are a pretty good low-key meta pick. They have some weaknesses, right? They're prone to disruption, but they can still OTK really quickly. They've still got, the Megalos, the Muling Glacia, the Abyss Gun. Some of the slower, older strategies haven't been, as incorporated, GenX Undine and Abyssland, but still it works. Plus, they can use all these new things like the Helmet Shark and Totally Awesome. So really good deck, and of course one of my personal favorites, so you probably knew this was going to be on the list. Deck 3 is Zombies. So Zombies, maybe not as much as some other decks on this list, but I do feel like Zombies have always stayed, to some degree, pretty relevant in Yu-Gi-Oh! Not always the face of the meta, but things like Mizuki just don't really get old. Today Zombies are used in completely different ways than they've been used in the past, but they have always had an imprint and a mark. Because, kind of at the outset you got things like, Goblin Zombie and Pyramid Turtle and Zombie Master and Illblood, but now it's, then, well, making a timeline. Then later on, you know, you had like these things like Plague Spreader Zombie that made it more of a synchro variant, really fast and crazy and things like that. I guess more recently though, we have things like Shiranui, which can really abuse a lot of the strength that zombies have. You've got cards like Cypher Lord Omega that can like reuse Mizuki. That I think that it's kind of a similar thing to Lightsworns in a way, where the reason why it will never like truly, you know, go away and die unless, you know, Konami decides to just ban everything. But the reason I don't think it'll ever really go away is because, you know, monsters in the graveyard that have good recurring effects like Mizuki and stuff, and that can be like recycled and like enable plays, that's never really going to get old. And it's one of those things where like zombies aren't powerful enough, I think, for Konami to ever want to ban or limit them anymore, but they are still just totally viable. Right now they're being used in like That Grass Looks Greener decks, mostly really just Mizuki and, you know, a couple of like the Shiranui cards, but still, I mean, zombies are never really gonna, I'm really about to make this joke. Zombies will never really die. Fourth deck's Burning Abyss. So this deck, I'm not a fan of this deck, but you know, it's really persisted. I think that for a long time, people were angry actually that this deck persisted as long as it did. Came out in 2014, literally been relevant ever since. Had its ups and downs, but let's be honest, Burning Abyss, even to this day, are still a pretty decent meta pick. I mean, they aren't in the spotlight anymore, and I feel like that's fine, you know, but they never really lost the cards that people really wanted them to lose, namely Dante. I mean, like, yes, Tour Guide's been limited. Yes, you know, you've had like, you know, Graph and Skarm up here on the ban list and stuff like that. But this deck still kind of persists. You know, it kind of worked in its own format, and it was a really powerful deck just the entire next year. Then you get things like, you know, Phantom Knights and Speedroid Terror Top and all these things that you can kind of combine with Burning Abyss that just make getting Dante out really fast, really consistent. And the thing is, it's never really going to get old, I think, because, you know, it's just such a floaty strategy. All these Burning Abyss monsters get these effects when they go to the grave, and it just happens when they're detached. So as long as you can make Dante and start milling, you know, you've always got a Dante Seer Loop, and you've always got, you know, Skarm and Farfa and like all these things that can just help you OTK your opponent. Beatrice is at 1, but I mean, it's still a good card. Phantom Knights just kind of replace those lost cards in like Seer and Skarm and Graph, like, you know, you just replace them with Phantom Knights that can just kind of continue to search the stuff. And so I think that Burning Abyss, for that reason, are always going to be good. In fact, if you wanted to play it now, I mean, it's not that bad of an idea. They have some weak matchups, but this deck is really cheap to get. I mean, it's funny to think that Dante at a time was a $100 secret rare, and now I think it's like worth $1 or $2. It's just kind of crazy. But yeah, you know, Burning Abyss, if nothing else, they're gonna persist. Like I said, I don't like the deck, but the way it's built, the floatiness, the consistency, all of that means this deck's just probably staying around for the long haul. And the last deck is Heroes, another deck that I kind of have some mixed feelings about, but that's not important. Elendil Heroes. This deck kind of started out in one direction and then it just moved on since. You know, it started out being relevant kind of as the whole like big city, little city, middle city decks, where it was really more of just, you know, Elemental Hero Ocean or, you know, Neos Alias, and then it kind of became more Neos Alias focused with like, you know, it and some other Gemini monsters, Gem Spark, Hero Blast, just kind of a slow, grindy thing, you know, you got like Honest and all that stuff. And then later on, like it became super Miracle Fusion based with like super polys and stuff where you're mostly making, there's a phase of like Absolute Zero, then we got like the Shining, then we got some like, you know, the Wind one and the Dark one where you could use super poly on your opponent's monsters and you need to add like Reborn Tengu or something and just make this really cool, floaty, anti-meta strategy. Then we got Dark Law, and I feel like more than anything, this is kind of when Heroes, I just fell out of love with this archetype a bit because Dark Law to me isn't what Heroes ever really were, but whatever. Anyway, when we got Shadow Mist and we got Dark Law, this deck became a super powerful anti-meta strategy. Basically, you know, you use Shadow Mist, use Mass Change, you get Dark Law out and some decks scoop. A little bit boring for my taste, but I mean, that's what it is. Still though, Heroes have stuck around, even when you kind of just consider things like Bubble Man. Hopefully maybe Stratos might come back one day. But it's funny to think that even with Stratos banned, Heroes have stayed relevant to some degree, like even in its absence. So that concludes the 5 decks that I think have really persisted the most in Yu-Gi-Oh! And honestly will probably continue to unless just something crazy happens. I mean, you know, yes, we've got Link Summoning coming out and all this other stuff, but to be honest, these decks have made it this far, so it's hard to see them going anywhere. Let me know though, what do you guys think? What decks did I exclude? What decks have been meta relevant? I know there are plenty of cards that have been meta relevant and even like engines, but I think that these are the decks that have really stood the test of time. And I think that's going to be it. So if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more Yu-Gi-Oh! I've got some more exciting announcements and details about a giveaway coming soon, so you'll definitely want to stick around for that. Without further ado, I'll catch you guys in the next one.